Hello and welcome to Console Shock Retro Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev, and as always, Stu. How you doing, Stu?
Oh, I'm doing great, Trev. I had a really good Tuesday night.
Oh, right, yeah. What were you watching? A football match, weren't you?
Yeah, some idiot suggested that we drive for 2 hours north of London,
some yokel area,
to go and watch a bottom of the table National League South clash. And we went there, and all I can say is it was a very exciting game. I heard some horrendous language, and I would go again. And Trev, you notice I tagged you in a post.
I think I saw that, yeah.
On Twitter. I noticed you haven't replied to it, so you're politely ignoring it. But
well, I didn't want to get into any details about non-league football on a video game podcast.
No, we'll talk about that later.
We tend to alienate. We've just alienated like everybody in the last couple of minutes. But, we stood out.
That's all they'll be about the English non-football league scene.
Yeah. It involves standing out in the cold and driving, basically. It's probably all everybody's interested in hearing about it. But, well, I guess it's not quite a straightforward segue, but the big thing in the world of video games, the thing that we do try and talk about, most of the time we talk about video games on this show, I think. We try to, is, well, everyone knows about it, but it's Microsoft purchasing the old Activision. So what's your sort of hot? That's what they're calling it, a hot take. What's your hot take?
I mean, when I first heard, I was pretty shocked. Actually,
yeah,
I was pretty shocked for the obvious reasons. I thought, oh my god, all these big games, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Diablo, all the Blizzard games. Are they all going to be exclusive to Xbox and PC? And then
it's an insane library. It really is.
Yeah, it's absolutely an insane library. And then the second thing that I sort of thought about was, oh great, well I've got an Xbox, I've got Game Pass. I'll be able to play all these games on day one. Brilliant. I'm really looking forward to it. So I was genuinely very shocked, and then I was sort of quite positive about it. And then I think, what was your initial thoughts on it, Trev? I imagine it was pretty similar.
Well, what I'll do first, before I talk about what I think about it, they're probably not too dissimilar thoughts from you, actually, Stu. But we actually have a guest on today, and it's someone it's very, very important to this show because it was one of the charter members, one of the founders of Console Shock. It was actually on about a year ago, an OG, yeah. He was on about a year ago when we sort of had a show that was just talking about how this whole thing got started in the first place, but we always wanted him to get him on as much as we can and kind of get the band back together. So he's joining us again. Thanks for coming on again, Al.
Thank you for having me back.
Great problem. To be here.
No problem. Great to have you here, Al.
We're glad the new format hasn't put you off, but you're actually wanting to come back, which is always
non-league football chat.
Yeah.
Just kind of zoned out when that happened.
This is absolutely great, and getting to talk about video games. I mean, what's not to love?
Exactly. Well, we like to think so. Now you've jumped in with us. The whole Microsoft buying Activision. Have you got any thoughts on that yourself?
It's definitely interesting. I'm not sure if things being console and PC exclusives will necessarily be a thing, possibly, but I'm only saying so because they own Minecraft, and because they own Mojang, and that's still very much a cross-platform kind of thing as well. So I think to deprive the existing user base, by just then cutting down to a single platform, I think might not work necessarily in their favor. It depends what kind of services they offer in the future, though.
It's still on PlayStation, isn't it? Minecraft, PS4?
It is, yeah. PlayStation, PlayStation 5.
Yeah. There's what they call the Java edition and the Bedrock edition, and Bedrock edition is on pretty much everything, whereas Java is exclusive to Mac and PC.
Oh, right.
So
yeah.
But the other thing that's interesting is just how it's going to shake up the company from a culture standpoint. because they've been under a lot of pressure because of their whole workplace culture. I mean, there's been allegations about all sorts of different stuff. They've had this kind of frat boy thing. Yeah, which we don't need to go into details of.
Probably not.
But I mean, they were in such a terrible position with all of that because it's an absolute mess and despicable. So Microsoft be able to have the funds and resources to basically completely shake up that leadership, I think is probably going to do the company the best in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's I think we're probably going to say very similar stuff. I think for me, I mean, obviously the big ones you're going to think of, the first one obviously that comes to everybody's mind is going to be Call of Duty. I think they've already said that contractually they're obligated to bring out, I think, the next 3. At least in the last couple of days that has been revealed. They've got to bring the next 3 out on the PS5 and PS4, I guess. And after that, I think it will go Xbox only. I mean, you're not going to buy Activision if you're not going to try and make some of that sort of stuff exclusive.
I think there's going to be exclusivity. So I think it'll be things like it'll come out on Game Pass and then it'll be 50 quid on PlayStation. You know, Xbox might get the DLC before PlayStation, and there might be a few sort of games that are Xbox exclusive, sort of new IPs and stuff like that. And games like Diablo, which, you know, Diablo 4, for example, that sort of, to me, sits a lot better in the Xbox environment because it came from the sort of the PC world. I think they will, you know, they're not going to just carry on the way that Activision was, that they will do things to, you know, push forward their Game Pass platform and, you know, and people will go, well, actually, if I pay, you know, whatever it is, $7.99 a month or $11.99 or whatever, and then I get Call of Duty, and I get this and I get that. I mean, it's almost like a bit of a sort of a no-brainer to get these things. Oh, but then you'll still be able to buy them for 50 quid on PlayStation.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think that's a good point, that they might just have little nuggets of it might be exclusive. I personally think there's a good chance it still might just be full on exclusive. I mean, God, can you imagine like basically the next Elder Scrolls could potentially be exclusive, and Call of Duty. I mean, there's plenty of people that have no interest. They're not brand loyalists, like casual gamers that just play Call of Duty and nothing else. They'll just jump to whatever console it's out on. So I think when you're spending this amount of money, I think you're going to do it with the intention of really like weaponizing it and really sort of going for it. So I think there's a good chance it could go either way. What you said, Stu, but I think there's a good chance it might be exclusive. I mean, Al, what do you think in terms of, is it good for the industry? Is it bad?
I don't know. I mean, competition's always a good thing. We've had that for years. Even when we were growing up with just Nintendo versus Sega, you would have your exclusives on each platform. And that was always just a big part of the playground, which system you had and which is. So I wouldn't say that it hurts anything. I think where it would hurt is the people who are already the existing user base who just don't happen to have that platform, and suddenly they're kind of cut off from a franchise that they love.
Yes.
But it is business, and so you couldn't blame them for doing so. But it could very easily go either way, as you said. And interesting as well, Stu, with you mentioning about Game Pass, because that library is going to increase a lot. So existing Game Pass holders, they're certainly going to have like a massive addition to their library.
Exactly, and that's what Metal Jesus said. He made the point of, now Microsoft own all the rights to the old Sierra games, and there's a huge, if you imagine all the 2600 Activision games that came out, and what Microsoft going to do with these, and to go back about a year when all the EA games came onto Game Pass, not straight away. I think there was a 3-month delay or 6-month delay or something. And then actually, if you go onto Game Pass on the PC, and there's so many like SimCity 2000, the Command and Conquer games are on there, which you can play. And they're all sort of classic PC games. So another thing is, are what are Microsoft going to do with those? Are they going to be all sort of re-released onto Game Pass? Probably for PC, but will they be bringing back any of these old IPs that they now suddenly own? I'm looking forward to another Leisure Suit Larry.
Looking forward to another River Raid.
River Raid, oh, I can't wait.
Legendary game.
River Raid 2.
They'll drop PlayStations in droves if that comes out on a Game Pass. So, but yeah, no, it's. I mean, we're not going to. I mean, as we, if we could dedicate a whole episode to the discussion.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think sort of picking up on what Al was talking about, whether it's bad or good or bad for the industry as a whole. I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, I think PlayStation will be okay. I think they've got the enough exclusive stuff. Especially since like the PS3 era going into the PS4 era and the PS4 era, of course, they've come up with some of their own, really good franchises. I mean, you got newer ones like Horizon Zero Dawn, but now God of War, of course, you can go back to Uncharted. They've got all those games that people will happily buy a PlayStation for. Last of Us, if they carry on making more of them.
The Japanese games as well.
Yeah,
every Japanese publisher. First and foremost, the PlayStation, that's what they're going to produce their game from. And then the Xbox, if they make it for that, will be a bit of a second thought. But one thing that came out regarding, it was something like $68 billion that Microsoft paid for Activision. And at the same day, the value of Nintendo on the stock exchange was something like $57 billion. So they they could have bought Nintendo. Obviously, I don't think Nintendo would have gone, oh, yeah, no problem. Let's go for that. But the point is, they spent more than what Nintendo was worth on that day. And that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and you could also ask, I mean, it's funny talking about, how will it affect the other guys? I mean, Nintendo have toddled along now pretty well without a Call of Duty. I mean, the last Call of Duty was on the Wii U, and that was like Ghosts, I think. Jesus, that's like 10 years ago on the Wii U, and the Switch hasn't had any of that, and it's fine, hasn't really had any of the EA games apart from a pretty crap FIFA every year that they just sort of recycle without really doing anything new on it. And that's fine. I mean, God, those the big milestone. It's passed a couple very recently. The Switch. It's now the biggest selling Nintendo home console of all time. It just beat the Wii, over 100 million units. And I think
Trev, it's a portable console. It shouldn't be in the same category.
It's a hybrid.
It's portable.
It's a hybrid on its own.
Trev, it's portable.
It's in its own. It's in its own.
Portable. It shouldn't be classed the same.
Should be not even a console. What is a console? What is a console these days?
You can pick it up and play it with your hands.
You know what?
You shouldn't categorize it.
You can do that with a PlayStation and an Xbox. It's just a bit heavier, and you have to duct tape the controller to it.
Hey, you could do it with the PS1 when you got the little screen you could attach to it.
Yeah, yeah. Is that suddenly not a console?
There you go. Yeah,
you add that on. Yeah,
but yeah, it's beaten the Wii now, and it's beaten the original PlayStation. So its next target is probably PS4, I think, which is about 118 million units. And I think it's going to do it. I think, I think it's going to do it.
Of course it will. They'll bring out the Switch Advanced or whatever, the Switch 2, which will based on the same sort of architecture, and the new Switch or whatever, and it'll just carry on going. And,
it'll be a budget model that'll be alongside whatever the new one will end up being.
And they'll bring out different colours.
Yeah.
And all the different things, and it will just carry on going. And in all honesty, PlayStation and Xbox are really just going to be sort of fighting for second place. Potentially,
yeah. If things go the way we think they will. Okay, well, like I said, we're not going to dwell too long on this topic. We want to get to our main thing we want to talk about, and that's something we've been threatening to do for a long time. We've talked about it on and off, probably throughout our run with Console Shock. The 90 some odd episodes we've done, but we haven't really focused on it for a whole episode. So we're looking to do that today, and we're going to talk about emulation. So I think a good place to start would be, Al. I mean, what was your first experience of emulation of older consoles?
That's a very good question. I remember first trying a very janky one for the original Nintendo back on, I think I must have been on Windows 98 or something like that, and it was awful. Like, it didn't really work properly. It was a nuisance to configure. Not a great experience, but it was
Sounds like it.
the novelty and just the the possibility of something like that happening, especially at such a young age, was kind of interesting to me.
It might well have been a very early NES emulator. It was Nesticle. Yes, very funny, immature name. But it was kind of I think it might have run in DOS mode, you know. So if you run it on Windows 98, it'd pop open a little DOS window for you, and it'd run it in that. But it had a really interesting menu that was like it had like the file menu at the top when you went full screen, but it was like in a funky like blue kind of bar with like a severed hand would be the mouse pointer. And yeah, that was what I first. I don't know, maybe the NES was the first ever like emulator that I ever used on anything, and it probably was Nesticle on MS DOS. Yeah, this would have been about about 1997, 8 time, I think. I'm not sure where one would have got the ROMs from in those days. Well, there would have been sites that would have let you download them, but. Yeah, I mean, I certainly remember that. I mean, Stu, what about you?
Very much the same. I remember my first sort of experiences with it was, I think actually a Game Boy emulator. I can't remember the name, and that was on Windows 95, 98 PC, and then I think I had a Spectrum emulator as well. I was like, oh wow, you can play Spectrum games on here. Then quickly sort of gave up with that. Yeah, sort of Game Boy sort of emulators and things like that. And I remember them working sort of very well. And I remember websites like, I want to say Dave's Classics.
Yeah, something along those lines,
something
like Dave's Cave of Games or something.
Yeah, and you would sort of download each individual game, and you can only do one at a time, or maybe two.
Remember the Spectrum? There was some websites even then that let you play in the browser. There was like a Java version of it.
Yeah,
maybe 2000. That was sort of happening.
It must have been later on, but yeah. So I remember you sort of download one or two games at a time because you're on dial up and it was, it was. I always thought it was, a pretty good experience. I remember, what was it, ZSNES or
ZSNES,
yeah, that's another one. That I used, and
similar sort of thing for me. As already mentioned, like Nesticle on DOS, but probably running it through like DOS mode on Windows 95 and 98. And it's funny because like in those early experiences. A lot of the time, that was the first time I really got to experience like the wider library of some of those sort of 8 and 16-bit consoles, because I owned a NES, right at the end of its heyday. I only had like a handful of about 8 or 9 games because they were like 50 odd quid each in the UK. So I was never going to get a huge library, but I'd obviously read about all the other ones in the magazines, and I remember I really wanted to play Star Trek 25th Anniversary on the NES. I couldn't get it. Never got a chance to buy it. And other loads of quirky games, the other Mario games I didn't have, and I think movie license games of movies, like RoboCop and things I would have wanted to play because I loved those films when I was a kid. Not that my parents let me watch 18-rated films, of course, so please don't worry about that. But yeah, it was a lot of doing that and playing a lot of those games for the first time, and actually sort of saying, I remember they reviewed this game in that magazine I used to get. Now, I'm being able to, it was kind of mind blowing having access to all of these games in a heartbeat, whereas for the longest time you had to go and buy them, and you only would ever have a limited amount unless you're a millionaire, so you were used to just having your 1 or 2 games you would just play constantly. So that was huge. And also, it would also like introduce me to like 60 hertz, because these emulators would often just run the, NTSC American versions of these games. Things like Sonic the Hedgehog and games that weren't optimized on PAL, so the music and the gameplay was slower. It was actually playing those for the first time. I never owned like a modded, import Japanese Mega Drive or anything that would play these things at 60 hertz. So that was my first experience. And actually, like, I do remember playing Sonic 1, on an emulator. I had the original back in the day and thinking, God, this is a bit weird. It's like the music's really quick and everything, but that was how it's supposed to sound. But it's funny because now we're further removed from me playing that emulator than we ever were from me playing the original. And that's completely overridden, whatever, affinity I had with the original PAL version. And also playing games with the keyboard, playing a lot of these emulators with the keyboard. It wasn't easy a lot of the time to plug. It was still before the days you could just plug a 360 controller into a PC and it just works. The driver's already there. Didn't have that at all. So it was trying to figure out controls. It was
to me stuff. that was a big stumbling block or a big sort of obstacle in the way, because I hated, I think I had some sort of controller that went through the sound card or something, and it just felt like, hold on, the buttons are in a slightly different. They haven't got enough buttons, or they're in a different place. Oh, and then you've got to configure them for sort of each and every game, and sometimes it didn't quite feel right.
Yeah, that was manual completely.
Yeah, and you didn't have the start and select button, which quite often you needed, and so I always found that sort of Game Boy was actually quite easy. An A and a B button, start and select, and away you go. But when you start getting the Super Nintendo or maybe the 6-button Mega Drive stuff, it would be a lot harder to actually let's get the buttons right and stuff. And once you did and you overcame that, it was all good. But
still difficult getting used to using a keyboard, certainly over like a controller.
I've never been a game with a keyboard. Never. I remember people used to use what was it, QA and OP and space on the Spectrum and stuff, and I just couldn't do it.
Oh God, that sounds horrific.
I think one of the other things is that back then as well, we weren't even using WASD on keyboards. We were using the arrow keys. So you're controlling things with your right hand, whereas on a console, you're used to controlling it with your left hand because of where the D-pad is. So there was always that. There was a weird muscle memory thing too.
Yeah, you were sort of counteracting what you were used to from just holding something in your hands. I mean, that's also, those early days, there's big issues with legality around sort of downloading ROMs and, what supposedly you can and can't do. I know how, a decent amount about that. I mean, what is your knowledge of what you're actually allowed and what you're not supposed to do, or how you're supposed to treat these things?
What you're allowed to is very, very little. To summarize things, essentially, emulators themselves are not illegal. And when I'm talking about this, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, so this is just stuff that I've picked up from reading and learning about
financial advice.
It's not financial advice. It's not legal advice. A lot of this pertains to US law, but a lot of this US copyright law impacts a lot of the rest of the world, especially as we're dealing with a lot of American companies or distribution and so on. But there's been a few different legal cases, and one of the biggest ones was Sony when they went up against Bleem. They also went up against Connectix, who had their virtual game station as well, so you could play PlayStation games on a Windows PC or on a Mac. And the decision that was made by the Court of Appeals was that copying a copyrighted BIOS software during the development of emulated software did not constitute copyright infringement, and it was actually covered as fair use. And that reverse engineering is essentially to help prevent monopolies. So having an emulator itself, not illegal. I think that's why we also see a lot of hardware stuff that's able to do this as well. But you can really only play anything on it that perhaps is like an indie game that somebody has made more modern day, rather than downloading a ROM. Now, a lot of people kind of think, well, as long as I own the game, I can play a ROM of it. That was certainly something that at first, that's what I kind of figured, coming to Canada, it's like, well, I've got a load of games now that don't play. I can't play them. I physically have the cartridge. I just have no way of playing the darn thing. But But it turns out it's actually even illegal to even play ROMs that you have, even if you own it.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a weird thing where it's like you've only bought the rights to it in that format, haven't you, effectively, to play it in that format, not as a disembodied ROM floating around. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, it comes about because there is the Copyright Act, and that's what's led to a lot of this confusion and people assuming that you can, because the Copyright Act says that you can create backups of applications, of software, I should say. Now, when it comes to making a copy of a ROM for a game, you can only do so legally if you're the one doing it, and only for archival in the event of the cartridge being damaged or failing. If you give away the game, you have to destroy the original or provide that with it. You can't just give out the backup to anybody. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But what complicates things even more is that Atari went after JS&A, who made something called the P-ROM Blaster, and Nintendo went against a company called Bung Enterprises, and they established that cartridge copiers are not protected by this law. So yes, you can create backups of software, but you can't do it from a cartridge.
That's so weird.
Yeah, and there's been a little bit of questionable rationale about that, because cartridges are now so much more in line with solid-state drives and flash storage mediums.
Yeah.
Than back when we had tapes and spinning hard disks. The reason why CDs kind of didn't fall into it is because you didn't need to get any dubious hardware. You had it already built into your computer. So this is where that becomes a little bit more dubious. And a lot of this is becoming very gray area for a lot of stuff. There's going to be arguments for and against. I think this is going to be a battle that will wage on for quite some time. But that is pretty much the legality of it, is that, if it's a ROM on the internet, it's illegal to download and play. As simple as that.
Oh, it's interesting because it's almost sort of something that it's such commonplace for this to be done, and I don't know the legality of things, and I don't think I've really got any ROMs on this computer or at all really. So I'm not sitting here sort of going, well, I'll say one thing but I'll do another, but I probably would, if I want to get some Super Nintendo ones, and but the way I've always thought about it is, well, actually, if you're the one distributing them, so if you're the one hosting the website, and you're making sort of money from it, from advertising and things like that, that's what, if I was doing that, I would think, oh, actually, I'm in a vulnerable position legally. But then if I were to download Super Mario World, and that's out on my computer, and then once in a while I played it, I'm sure if Nintendo wanted to make an example out of that, they certainly could, but I wouldn't be worried for that.
Yeah, there's certainly, Nintendo have gone after a lot of hosting sites where they did physically store the ROMs on there, and so there was definitely a lot of takedowns of that kind of stuff.
I know, and Nintendo, and also they've people have done videos on YouTube of how to modify your X or Y, and they've been taken down, and that's infringes the sort of copyright, and whether or not I don't know sort of the legality of that, but it's quite interesting how on one side you get Nintendo that seem to be the ones leading all of this and taking down websites that are they're breaking the law, and that and then giving some poor person some huge great big fine which completely bankrupts them or sends them to jail or whatever. But then on the other hand, you've got Sega, where they have a little bit more, I think, where the things where they've done, say for example the Sonic games, they've actually people have made better versions of it, and they've almost embraced that a little bit more.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of different stuff going on, especially when you look at how many have licensed it. So, like you're saying with Sega and Sonic, they've obviously licensed to Games, who've made like a mini Sega Mega Drive and a mini Sega Genesis, depending on your region, and that is a hardware emulator that's emulating ROMs, but they are doing so through a licensing, and this is one of the things where it becomes like you can understand both sides of the fence. That yes, we're talking about very old games, and a lot of people, and for a lot of things, I agree with that. You don't want to lose access to the ability to play these games that could get lost to time. These creative works, you want to preserve them.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's the issue that I see, where if someone actually, I really want to play, a Spectrum game, for example. There's a certain Spectrum game, and you can buy the Spectrum game for £1, for £2, £3, something like that. Not a lot of money, but the point is that's going to degrade. The tape's going to disappear, and so the only way to play it is via an emulator, and it's on your computer. It will be a perfect sort of version of it. And that's the only real way to sort of hold on to that. And, it's not like, books where, you can buy older versions of books, or you can buy a PDF or of certain books, and you can kind of, hold on to those. Imagine if to read this book, you need a certain machine that's extremely unreliable, will cost you £700, and you need a special wire to go into it, and then you need to buy an old TV, and all these different hoops you've got to jump through to read an old book. It's just, I think there should almost be some sort of line in the sand that says, okay, once a game is 20 years old, it is then free to be emulated for your own personal use, or something like that.
That's something that I 100% agree with, and I would love to see something like that. The legality behind it is where things get more complicated, because we're talking copyright, and stuff doesn't just automatically enter the public domain. We've also got, if we take Nintendo as an example, they've got I think about 80 titles from the original Nintendo out on their virtual, like on their online service. And there's going to be other licensees that will have games from other distributors and so on. And so you could argue that by downloading ROMs of those titles that are suddenly active, that you are taking away from that publisher. Obviously getting a game secondhand, the original publisher and so on, they're not getting a slice of any of that pie, because that's all just done privately. So it could be that, yes, we have something that, say, after 20 years becomes, available for you to download as a ROM, but then if it is sold legally, then what happens to that? The other thing is that there's about 700 titles in total. So that's a huge proportion of games that aren't on Nintendo's service, which may never see the light of day. And part of that is because games aren't just like applications. It's not, you've got the code that's copyrighted, you've got characters, you've got music. We sometimes see, and another great example is Arcade 1-Up. Their whole business is making arcade cabinets that are emulators. And when they released the Turtles cabinet, the original Turtles arcade game couldn't use the original theme music. They had to make their own music because that music was copyrighted and they didn't have the rights to that. So that muddied it. Yeah. They've re-released a Turtles in Time one, so it's the same games, it's just different artwork, and they've got some online stuff. They were able to get the licensing by that point, so that one has the original music restored. But this is where it complicates things, because there's just so much more to that copyright situation, because you've got things like music and characters and things. And as much as we want it to be, let it be public domain, let us allow us to preserve these. There's so much in copyright law that prevents it from happening. And I don't know whether that's a good thing for those copyright holders to protect the work that they've created. It could very well be a bad thing, especially as copyright changes hands. There's a lot of companies that made this software that no longer exist. But also, is it just that copyright law is out of date and doesn't match up?
I mean, I don't know if this is maybe a little bit more of a debate that's not. I don't know. There's maybe sort of beyond sort of my knowledge, but I mean, the whole copyright law it certainly sort of needs updating, and there's nothing more frustrating when you're watching a YouTube video and it suddenly goes quiet because someone had 7 seconds of a song, and instead of the person who spent 20 hours, 100 hours making a YouTube video, and then the whole monetization is all taken off them because it was 7 seconds of happy birthday or whatever that was on a video. Well, you could argue that person put a lot more effort into the song Happy Birthday. I'm sure the people who have made that have only shed loads of money, but I think something should be done. But then on the other hand, you're absolutely right, is if I go on to the Switch, I can buy lots of the old Sonic games, and there's lots of old things that I can buy. So my argument is, well, they're sort of lost to time, and there's no other way of playing them. Well, in a lot of cases there are ways of playing them, and I think it'd be great if there was some sort of almost like a Netflix of retro gaming where all these things run on here as a legal service. So if you can imagine the Oliver twins, every month they got £1,000 or something through the post wouldn't be through the post, would it? But it will be here's your money from
in
Gameflix.
cash,
in
through
cash,
the post.
Postal order. From Gameflix, saying, well done. Lots of people played Dizzy. And
bring back shareware.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you should you should say there should be a Netflix. I mean, the closest thing we've got is probably Antstream, which I think again might have mentioned a couple of times on previous podcasts. But there's Antstream that's currently free. And it's basically, I think it actually has the Dizzy games on there. It's got lots of Amiga games, Namco arcade games, things like Zool and Gallagher and Atari 2600 games, basically sort of 8 and 16-bit games. Obviously, there's a huge hole in its library. There isn't any Sega stuff, no Konami, no Nintendo. So it's limited, but it's pretty good. I mean, to us, there's probably a limit as to how many games they could ever really get on their service, because they would need buy-in from everybody, really. And I really doubt Nintendo would ever.
You wouldn't get the Nintendo games on there. No, the Nintendo first-party stuff, and then someone's always going to think, old Taito. Oh well, we could release another Taito collection on the Switch in a couple of years, and we'll get our money that way. It's okay, thank you. And
Taito, I mean the guy, the Irish crisps.
Taito, the
crisp.
little fella on there.
Little
fella, made in a castle.
Potato dude.
That's one. Taito. It's spelt Tayto.
Pretty much, isn't it? It should be.
That's it. That's
Taito.
The Japanese arcade company. Tayto.
Sega Lord X calls them Taito.
Taito.
He always says it in that particular way.
There's a couple of other benefits, and Stuart, you've already kind of touched on one of them, and that is that hardware and physical media wears out over time. We know that CDs expire, tapes get worn. We've also got hardware stuff, and as more time goes on, more modern systems with all their DRM stuff is going to really get impacted as well. I remember reading like the PlayStation 3, the CMOS battery, which keeps track of the time, was required for logging onto the PlayStation Network.
Yeah.
And
the PS4 had the same thing. I think they fixed it now with an update, but for the longest time.
That's it. PlayStation 4, similar thing that's patched. I don't know if the PlayStation 3 one was or not, but the idea was that if it died or that battery was replaced, it had to log onto that service. So if that online service goes down, that system is then bricked effectively, and you can't play those games.
Yeah.
So as technology gets a little bit more complicated and relies more on online services, all the benefits it gives us, it does leave us with this whole ticking time bomb that makes it even harder to keep these older devices going.
So that kind of puts the onus again, and we've already touched upon it, but on the people that made the games. I mean, Nintendo's the big one, but they're sort of, you know, I mean, it's not even called the Virtual Console anymore, but their support for older games is up and down depending on what generation we're in. Like the Wii had a great back catalogue of games. It ran into the thousands, I think, eventually, of Mega Drive, TurboGrafx 16, NES, you know, N64, Super Nintendo. It had a Neo Geo. It had everything. And then, you know, the Wii U came up, and the Wii shop carried on for a few years after that, but that's gone now. So unless you've downloaded everything you ever wanted, that's it. You can't buy them anymore. And all we've got on the Switch is, you know, the sort of fairly not brilliant service that we get on Switch Online, which you pay for, and you get a bunch of NES games and you get SNES games, and now you got to pay extra to get N64, and it's a very, very limited chunk of the library is what you're really getting access to. It's better than nothing, you know, I would say. I'm not, again, there's a big debate if it's worth the money that they charge for it. I mean, I pay for Switch Online because I like playing NES and SNES games, and so, you know, I get that value out of it. But if you're just paying for the online on its own and you've got no interest in the old games, it probably isn't worth it. But
it's good at least as a backup service, because they at least offer that as part of that basic package, which is good. I think the second thing as well, which is something that I don't think we would ever get from a service like Nintendo's, is something that the emulation scene has done, which is translations, providing localized translations for a lot of games. A good example is the Mother series, which is a very popular series amongst a lot of Nintendo fans, but never had a North American or European release. So there was no English translation. They have provided that, so you can play it in English, and I'm sure other regions as well. And so, you know, it means that emulation allows it to open it up to so more people on the planet to experience these wonderful experiences. And that's something that the legality behind things right now is that it's not allowed, which is a shame, really.
And even fixing bugs within games to improve them. There's certainly
Grand Theft Auto was a good example recently. The Awful Trilogy,
I mean, thank goodness. Yeah, thank goodness Jet Set Willy was the first one to come up with a patch to fix it. Otherwise, that would have been a game lost to time as one that you could never complete, and that would have relied on emulators to do what they actually did at the time, which was to fix that little bit of code.
It's funny as well that you should mention like translations. I've got recently got hold of a Japanese Sega Saturn, and I've got a Satiator, which is an ODE, and I've been playing some translations. Actually, I played Bulk Slash, which is a really fun like mech game, which is actually fairly straightforward in terms of being able to play it even without the translation. But now the whole storyline and the voiceovers. I mean, they've even got like people voicing stuff in English, which is really cool. And also, it's not the best way to play this game, but the Japanese, the Saturn got a port of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, or Nocturne in the Moonlight, as it's called in Japan. And that's been translated as well. Although really, you're probably going to play the PlayStation version of that game, which we did get over here. But if you want to play it on the Saturn, you can, and you'll be able to understand all the menus now and everything. So and dialogue. So yeah, I mean that's people like hacking the game effectively. I
think another issue is, or another positive about emulation is, now I haven't really got any examples here, but a lot of the emulators actually allow you to do sort of online gaming, so you can play against other people online, and
I've even provided achievements as well.
Providing achievements, and so they're giving the game sort of a little bit more sort of function, I guess, and because it's always difficult to get 4 people around to sort of play Bomberman, but then if you're going online, well, they're always going to be there, and you want to play the SNES version, the Saturn version, maybe. I know emulation's not too great on that, or maybe I'm 5 years behind the scene there, but that could be sort of a great way of actually adding more sort of value to it.
Yeah,
one
it
of
was.
the things.
Sorry, go on now. Yeah.
One of the things I was going to say was that there's so many different types of emulators as well, and it's one of those things where there's a lot of pros and cons because, obviously you can get things like you're saying, like online play, achievements. There's also a lot of things like filters and shaders to change how games look because different people have different tastes. Some people like things to be pixel perfect. Some people like it to be in the original aspect ratio. You've even got to deal with things like dithering and give a CRT effect and have scan lines. And some people love scanlines, some people don't. I never liked them. And then I've come to like them over time as I've understood more behind them, such as when you're looking at a Sega Mega Drive in playing Sonic, the degraded image fidelity that you get using a composite video signal, degrades the image. But the developers embrace those limitations of like the loss of color resolution and artifacts in the video signal so that you could have things like, instead of having like a waterfall where they're just using lots of vertical lines, it makes it look transparent because it kind of blurs everything together. And so when you're playing things through an emulator, a lot of the time without these filters, they don't look as good as we remember them looking. I think in Sonic for the Master System, the trees are just a triangle, but the jaggedness makes it look like they've actually got separate branches and leaves just because the quality is a lot less. So there's a lot of filters and shaders that you can apply, and they come with all varying degrees of success. And when you have official ones provided, like the one that Nintendo made, because they make their own emulators for their stuff, you have one option for CRT, and it's like you either like how that looks or you don't, and there's not really much to tweak it.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, because talking about the quality of the graphics that you can get, like something like you could there's the argument of like the 16-bit consoles and the 8-bit where you probably do want to add those scan lines and get that composite video look. But I think when you get to say the N64, and certainly that's probably the main example I would use, that is very difficult to get to look good, on anything outside of a PVM, because it added a ton of blur to the picture, just the anti-aliasing that it used. And now you can, in an emulator, you can boost up the internal rendering resolution to beyond 320 by 240. And now, that you can make the graphics look really clean and nice, and a lot easier to stomach on a HD TV, which you're probably playing the emulator on through, whether it's, RetroArch or something.
But talking about that, Trev, is there's a guy I watch on YouTube called Nick 930, and he does all these great they're sometimes like 3-4 hours long, history of Grand Theft Auto, the history of Call of Duty, the history of this, and he sort of goes through each game. And sometimes he's playing like Call of Duty 1 or Call of Duty 2 or something, and he's playing it on the PlayStation, but he's actually playing it through an emulator, so he can capture it on his PC on the screen. And I'm looking at that and going, that's so it's amazingly clear. And it's like, well, you're comparing it on an emulator. I'm talking about the graphics, and I think it's not quite right. Yeah, and it almost shouldn't be. You should have it on the original TV, or getting the signal directly out of the PlayStation, because it's the image almost just it kind of looks odd to me.
Silent Hill is one of the best examples of that, because they use so much dithering that everything just like when you're looking at the fogginess, it looks horrible because you can see every single pixel of that dithering, whereas it was supposed to be very blended and look like fog. And a lot of pixel art, they would have checkerboard patterns, or they'd have the sections where it's just all of these lines, and those vertical line work blends all kind of go together to make a smooth gradient. So you'd end up with much higher quality images. Just because you're looking at it through the original hardware. And in a lot of cases, playing the original hardware on an original CRT lets you experience it the way that the developers intended, because they were playing into the limitations of the hardware at the time. And doing that virtually is possible, but there are so many varying degrees of success, and people have their own tastes as to what they do like and don't like, that it becomes a very complicated mess. Like once you start twiddling and tweaking all of those kind of settings for emulators that allow you to.
Yeah, and you get like there's those sort of quality of life things we've already touched upon with the graphics. I mean, things like I find that works best on consoles that didn't have great video output in the first place, like the N64, things like the 3DO that only had composite available. I quite like, the PS1, like just in through RGB on my HDTV, because it's, it's 320 by 240, very sharp, crisp. Looks like an emulator just running on the lowest settings anyway. So it looks pretty good. Then you've got other things though, like you've got Rewind, which is brilliant. If you're someone like me that is just quite happy just to cheat their way through a game just to get to the end, effectively, of a game that especially when you're a lot older, like we are now, unfortunately, and don't have the time for this kind of nonsense of playing a game for 20 hours a day because we're 9 years old. Especially like hugely difficult platform games that are in the 8 and 16-bit era, like Mega Man and all of that. Now you can just rewind, with sometimes they put a funky little like RetroArch, gives you like a funky VHS effect, rewinding VHS effect to jump back a few seconds, and then you can quickly get past that bit. I mean, save states do that job as well, but you kind of, avoiding the you're not having to stop and hit save and then reload. You just gives you a quicker way of doing it. But I love that. I absolutely love that. And obviously if you sign up to Retro Achievements, you can get achievements as well. So all those things are really great, the way they add to the old games.
It's certainly nice not to have to leave your 8 or 16-bit games running overnight just because you don't want to lose your place.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what do people, obviously, I think with emulation now and all that 1,000,001 different ways and hundreds of different emulators and all the ways of, getting the ROMs legally and illegally, what do you think is the future for sort of emulation? Will it be more, I don't know if the right word is, maybe, how will it be more? Will it go down the route of like the analog pocket? Maybe be a lot more sort of legalized where, you have to buy the cartridge, but then, the emulators within, that's a sort of an FPGA, but maybe that's sort of an answer to the question.
Yeah, I think the analog pocket and that whole FPGA thing is really interesting. And like you say, because you're running the original cartridge and the hardware it's not doing software emulation. It's the chips are basically emulating the actual hardware and how that functioned. You get a much truer experience for the game, and you get a lot of other features as well. The Mr. Multi-System is another implementation as more of a desktop side of things rather than something that's pocket like the analog. And when you've got things like GB Studio, which allows you to develop software, like to make your own games without any programming knowledge. Like they partnered with Analog on that for the Pocket Analog, so you can basically play your games that you make on this hardware.
Cool.
Yeah, and they certainly give you a really good way of experiencing it. Like the screen on the Pocket Analog, I've never seen in person, but from what I've seen online, they've gone to such great depths in the detail of it to make sure that scaling is right. And so it becomes a very good way of experiencing these games a lot clearer.
I went to sign up to get an analog pocket, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And it was literally, they said, oh yeah, you'll get one in Q3 2023.
Yeah. Yes. I heard that the wait times were like a year.
It was something ridiculous like that, and I thought, God,
my one problem that I have as well is that as much as I love this, there are people within the industry, and I'm talking like the auction houses, where there's been a lot of stuff online. You can find tons of YouTube videos on it about how they've been manipulating prices of games and basically driving up the cost of old games.
Yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah, to the point that you could get one of these systems, but then the actual physical cartridges, if you don't have them already, will become incredibly difficult to even afford. And that's certainly a downside, and that's because of other people manipulating the market just for their own greed.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean the I mean, with that, maybe that's sort of an answer to the question is actually to play these games the proper way. If they're not on some sort of online service, for example, Earthbound. If you want to play that on the original hardware, it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of pounds to get that game, and Panzer Dragoon Saga and
common games, that are released,
like common games, and there might be £25, £18. It's still quite a lot of money, and
Conker's Bad Fur Day, like a loose cartridge is like £200. That's a fairly common game.
Exactly, and I think what my point is, that's going to sort of push people to go to, well, I want to experience these things that people on YouTube talk about, and what everyone talks about. But then I can't be paying all this money to do it, and to go back to the film industry, and legally, if I want to watch whatever film I want to watch, I can go on to iTunes movies or whatever it is. Amazon Prime. I pay $4.99. I can watch whatever film I want legally. It's just all there. It all just works, and great, brilliant. It's but then if you want to do something legally with video games, there's a real in a lot of circumstances real barrier to entry.
Yeah, and as we kind of mentioned a lot earlier, digital preservation of all of these games, which are creative works of art, is important for society and culture. I mean, the history of video games is such a fascinating thing, and to lose some of those to time would be such a shame, especially down to the legality of things. Obviously laws have to be in place, because one thing that we're talking a lot about emulating retro games. Where I think things get really muddy is when people are trying to emulate current generation systems, because at that point you're looking at piracy, and that's just flat out.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't be interested in any of that. No. But you bring up a great point, Al, because if someone like the games from the past. They're all physical media. They're all on there. They're all what they are. But then games are coming out now, and the one that comes to mind was Tony Hawk's 5 or whatever it was, and the game actually on the disc was completely unfinished. They relied on the day one patch. So if all these services are turned off in 10, 15 years, and then you put that disc in, you haven't got the game. Just because you own the disc, you haven't got it. It's it won't be able to be downloaded, and it's gone. You're unable to play it. You might not want to play it. It's not that good, but
Yeah. I mean, probably wrap it up on this, but I think I don't think there will be a perfect solution. It's just too. I think it's impossible. You're never going to get Sega, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, because there's Xbox's retro, the original Xbox, and whoever owns Atari properties. You'll never be able to get them all to sit in a room and be like, "Yep, we're just going to make a single platform. You can go in and we'll have all of our library there." Because it's just games that have disappeared. Like imagine just getting the Amiga's complete library available is that would be a nightmare. As
how many people has the Commodore name passed through now?
Oh yeah, just in itself,
ownership and stuff. Yeah,
there's got to be the Spectrum is 20,000 games or something. Some of them are from software houses that were just a couple of people in a bedroom that have passed to other people and then passed again. And the people that own these things don't even know they own them half the time. So yeah, unfortunately, I just can't see a solution to it. It's going to be, to get anything like what you would want, it's a manual process of, doing it yourself. And unfortunately, going into those murky legality waters and setting up RetroArch for yourself, which is quite a task in itself to get everything on there that you want. But, of course, there are AliExpress places of the internet where, someone will buy this super awesome retro console, 50,000 games, and it's 9 Super Mario Brothers 3 copies with different names and all that stuff. But Yeah, no, I think
and then
we've got
duplicated and triplicated. And...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the best you'll get, they'll provide their own ability to buy older games. I mean, Sony have kind of got a bit crap with that lately. The PS3, you could get PS1 and 2 games fairly, they had not a great library of those, but they were there. Now there isn't really. Well, there's what's on PS Now, really, which isn't great. Nintendo, Nintendo Online. Microsoft are doing, they keep the Xbox 360 games available to buy that work on the Xbox One and original. I think there's only about a handful, really, but a handful of original OG Xbox games. And it'll just be a flaky mishmash of whatever you're allowed. They'll dig out from their archives and let you use. Unfortunately, I can't really see a way around it. But anyway, on that positive note,
can't see a way around it.
Yeah,
we're a dead end.
We're doomed. Anyway, Stu, where can you find us on the interwebs?
ConsoleShock.net is our website. You can find us on Twitter under Console Shock. And then you can find us on Spotify, you can find us on iTunes, or any sort of podcast client. Again, under Console Shock, search that, and then YouTube and Facebook. And we love any comments on there. We've got a load of comments this week actually on our Facebook group, so it was good hearing from people's stories and things like that, and then moaning why I hadn't uploaded onto our iTunes.
And rightly so, yes.
And rightly so, yeah. Okay, I was a day late, Trev. Anyway, so find us on all those places. And apparently, Trev, you do another podcast, I've heard.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're probably going to get there like by default then. But Al, where can we find you on the interwebs?
Well, I'm on Twitter as Alistair McFly, and you can find everything else I'm up to online by checking out my website at alistairmcfly.com. And that includes, as Stuart's alluded to, a podcast that I do with Trev, all on Star Trek, called Long Range Sensors. We've been on a bit of a hiatus, but we'll be going to be coming back with Long Range Sensors and also a new spin-off series called Short Range Sensors as well. And you can find out more about that at longrangesensors.com and find us on all the usual podcasting places too.
Cool. So please, if there's any Trekkies listening on the unlikely event there is, please check out our other show, Long Range Sensors, and soon Short Range Sensors. New episodes will be coming soon. Otherwise, stay tuned to Console Shock, and thank you everybody for listening to the latest episode, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.